don't in any way at any time teach you to turn the other cheek.
Harriet Tubman is an American icon who escaped slavery before repeatedly returning to the Deep South to help dozens of others escape. That part of her story is known and celebrated, including in a new star-studded film called Harriet. But there's another aspect to her story that may be less well known. She was a daring and brilliant military scout and strategist who earned a pension for her service during the Civil War. And we thought this Veterans Day would be a good time to acknowledge this history, so we've called Elizabeth Cobbs. She's the author of The Tubman Command. It's a novel based on history that focuses on Tubman's leadership during a raid in Confederate territory. And Elizabeth Cobbs is with us now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my delight.
So most people know Harriet Tubman as the leader of the Underground Railroad. I mean, it's not quite clear how many people that she rescued, but the record suggests at least 100 people, possibly more. But you refer to her as a veteran. Why is that?
Well, she was a military veteran, and as you mentioned correctly, she had a military pension. We tend to, I think with women leaders, we leave big parts of the story out. And with Harriet Tubman, it's really important to understand that she's our foremost female patriot who really does deserve a place on the $20 bill for the reason that she hits so many levels of public service, both before the war, but also during the Civil War. She's a disabled military veteran who is the outstanding spy in the Civil War. There's nobody at the start of that war who has the kind of spycraft that Harriet Tubman does. She'd make the CIA proud.
Your book focuses on a Union raid that liberated hundreds of slaves in the Combahee River region of South Carolina. That raid is well attested to, but even in your book and in the author's note, where you quote a contemporaneous newspaper account. Can I read some of it?
Please do.
From the Wisconsin State Journal, June of 1863. It talks about, Colonel Montgomery and his gallant band of 300 black soldiers, under the guidance of a black woman, dashed into the enemy's country, struck a bold and effective blow without losing a man or receiving a scratch. The colonel was followed by a speech from the black woman who led the raid, under whose inspiration it was originated and conducted. For sound sense and real native eloquence, her address would do honor to any man, and it created quite a sensation. They never name her in this account.
No, but they do say, the account does say, if you go slightly further, it says she is now called Moses. So this, you're right, the man doesn't even know this is Harriet Tubman. But he says, it's a black woman who led and organized this raid, and she's called Moses. Now, he thinks she's called Moses because she has just brought 750 people to freedom. But she'd been, of course, called Moses and had used it as a code name for, 11 years before the war. I mean, she's the only person who has all this experience going behind enemy lines. And that's why she was encouraged to go south and serve by the governor of Massachusetts. And so it's just an amazing thing, that we tend not to know about. And yet, my gosh, it's just off the hook as a story.
Can you talk a bit more about the raid itself? What exactly happened?
Oh, yes. So the raid takes place, after midnight on June 2nd of 1863, and 2 U.S. gunships go up a river called the Combahee River in South Carolina, launching off from the Sea Islands. And what they do is that they burn to the ground 6 or so plantations. They liberate those people. They destroy an enemy bridge across the river. And this is on the approach to the railroad between Savannah and Charleston. And so what they do is they destroy enemy stores. They free 750 people, and they prove that black soldiers can carry out these kinds of missions successfully.
I was wondering why this aspect of Harriet Tubman's life is not better known. I wonder why you think that is.
I think we tend to do this thing of, when we think of war, we think of guys. It's sort of men. And of course, obviously, they led the fight. But we tend to just write women out of war, and I don't know why we do that with Harriet Tubman. Some people, some historians, amateurs mostly, have said, well, what proof do we really have? We have this, we actually have quite a bit of proof. We have as much proof of what she did in a military sense as we do of what she did in the Underground Railroad. Everything she did was clandestine. Spies do not document what they do, but we have a lot of proof. And so I think we do need to redefine her as America's greatest patriotic figure, female patriotic figure. So I want to see her on Black History Month, defined a certain way, but I also want to see her on that list, that short list of outstanding Americans who were founders of our nation. And in her case, as with Lincoln's, founders of a modern America.
That is Elizabeth Cobbs. She is the author most recently of The Tubman Command. She's also a professor of history at Texas A&M University and is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Professor Cobbs, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Michelle.
We don't in any way at any time teach you to turn the other cheek.
You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio. And I'm your host, John G. Horse. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular black classifieds, and assisting in counter-racist codification. The title of today's episode is Oshun, the Divine Feminine, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, and the myth of Black American cowardice. Yes, indeed, we here on P.A.R., People Activity Radio, prides ourselves on decodifying, de-whitenizing history that is pounded upon us from the dominant society's perspective. We do not identify as being members of the usual suspects that we call the dominant society, people who classify themselves as white and believe in white supremacy. Again, I will repeat, the title of today's episode is Oshun, the Divine Feminine, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, and the myth of Black American cowardice. I, John G. Horse, have consistently made an effort when mentioning counter-racist violence to include not only foundational Black American males and their legacy of resisting, of fighting against, of not accepting victim status or Black classification, mistreatment, terror, domination, etc. I pride myself on also consistently including the contribution and side-by-side effort, meaning foundational Black American male and foundational Black American female, side by side under the guise of a common interest, not to be subjugated, under the guise of a common interest, not to be victimized, under the guise of a common effort to return violence to those who disseminate violence upon us. At no point in history has foundational Black American men and foundational Black American women not fought together. Period. Let's move on. And under that context, the first clip that I played was a description of the Oshun deity of West African people, the divine feminine, and the importance of duality of feminine and masculine principle. We coexist. Ain't nobody running nothing. We all have roles. We are leaders in those roles, meaning the masculine energy has the leadership in that realm. The feminine energy has leadership in that realm. Coexisting together, creating, for the lack of a better term, the yin and the yang, the positive, negative, the feminine, the masculine. Autochthonous people, indigenous people, aboriginal people have always practiced these concepts of dual energies. So ain't no way I'm gonna sit here and have a series of video essays talking about the myth of Black American cowardice without placing a light on foundational Black American female woman contribution. It's as simple as that. Let's move on. Let's get to the information. We're not going to be here all night long. We're going to give you sources. It's up to you to go and dig and flip the pages, but we giving information from a counter-racist perspective. That is what we do here on People Activity Radio. Rosa Parks. There was a clip played about the exhibition at the Library of Congress, highlighting Rosa Parks in her own words, and I quote, let me paraphrase. I ain't quoting, let me paraphrase. Rosa Parks mentioned in some of her writings that she would sit up burning midnight oil. And she remembers in particular sitting with her grandfather in Tuskegee, Alabama, shortly after World War I, when white terror domination, domestic terrorism ratcheted up because there was militarily trained foundational Black Americans who participated in the military, who came back looking for some compensatory action, immediate compensatory retribution or reparations for their participation in foreign wars. So you would have all these skirmishes in the United States because you had white supremacists that wanted to disarm and try to remove the Black self-respect out of the foundational Black American veterans. So you have all these racial clashes that they call racial riots, which were attempted racial dislocation, ethnic cleansings, attempted land grabs by the white supremacists. You've heard this over and over on P.A.R. We don't need to dig deep into that, but under that context, Rosa Parks said she would burn midnight oil sitting up with her granddaddy shortly after World War I in Tuskegee, Alabama, doing fire watch on post as she was a little 8-year-old girl. And she said that she hoped and prayed and wished that a Klans member would come into their home because she wanted to see her granddaddy pop one. And she said, if a Klans member entered our property or our home, they would surely die that night. Now, what does that tell you? What does that tell me? What does that tell us as foundational Black Americans? You are listening to a woman who we know as the woman who refused to get up, who tried to tell, and everybody tried to tell her she was tired. No, she wasn't tired. She was practicing counter-racist codification, which she did not remove herself from the seat, which was in the Black section of the bus. What they wanted her to do was, because the white section was filled, they wanted her to get up from the assigned section for people who were classified as Black, after she done worked all day, after her ancestors were the foundation of this country, built this country for free of charge, after her ancestors were foundational Black American veterans and saved this country from oblivion, from the Confederacy. They wanted her, Rosa Parks, who come from family members who had no problem returning fire with fire from her own testimony in her own writings. If a Klansman would enter our property or enter our home, he would surely die that night. She was raised by that. Not no cheek turning. You understand me? So when you understand who we are and where we come from and how we are here, if you are classified as black at any point, even till today, you have to maintain a militant disposition because you are under attack in all areas of people activity. The sooner you understand this, the easier it will be to codify your survival and your existence. Surely if a Klans member entered our home, they would die that night. She knew Granddaddy was going to pop one. What the brother said on the movie, Pop Go the Weasel. What was that, Players Club? But I digress. We do not come from no chumps. We do not come from no cowards. We do not come from no cheek turners. If we did, we would have been wiped off this planet already. We wouldn't exist in the country. You understand me? The next clip. I made a point to play a clip of Dr. Elizabeth Cobbs, suspected white supremacy, she's a suspected white supremacist, but that's neither here nor there. But she has a book that documents Sweet Mother, Sweet Queen, Harriet Tubman, and her contribution pre-Civil War and during the Civil War for the liberation of foundational black Americans. She not only was a nurse, she not only fed the wounded, she not only was a paid informant, a paid spy, for the lack of a better term, CIA for the federal government, one of the most successful spies of the federal government, well documented. She was also married to a foundational black American veteran who at one point she received his pension after his death. But wait a minute. The clip also told us she led a regiment of black troops in a military exercise that freed up to 100 to 300. Excuse me for not knowing the number. You do the research. I'm giving you the source. This ain't no doggone class on specifics. I'm giving you the source. You do the resource. I'm just giving you the context of enslaved foundational black Americans. She freed 100 to 300 enslaved black Americans and led the effort, gave a victory speech, the whole 9 yards. I believe she received payment during her military service. And eventually, after a bunch of white supremacists intervention and not wanting to admit it, I think 100 and something years later, she was compensated with payment for her pension, if I'm not mistaken. But that's just, she's a victim of racism, white supremacy, just like we still are. And until we solve this problem, we're going to continue to hear these stories of mistreatment and subjugation directed toward people who are classified as black. But this sweet mother, Queen Mother, Harriet Tubman is an American United States of America super patriot who went above and beyond. She didn't turn no cheek. She didn't have to be convinced. And she worked with a network of foundational black American men and women, but they're going to tell you she worked with white folks, but she worked with a network of foundational black men and women who risked their lives behind and beyond enemy lines for their own liberation. What you had was the federal government understanding the people with the most motivation to rise against the Confederacy was the sleeping giant who was already rising against the Confederacy and the federal government for their liberation. Foundational Black Americans. I have a lot of energy when I talk about this stuff here. You're going to have to excuse me, but there's a movie, and I'm quite sure all of us know about it because there's been a lot of talk about it. I'm not trying to promote the movie. I haven't seen the movie. But if the movie does not have Harriet Tubman relationship with her two husbands, by one of them which she received a pension for his military service after he passed away, and it does not highlight the fact that she was one of the most successful spies in the liberation and saving the Union from being taken over by the Confederacy. She participated heavily in saving the United States of America from being overran by the Confederacy, who seceded from the United States of America, but we call them the South. Not only that, she participated heavily in liberation of people who were classified as black and enslaved. Not only that, she was paid for her contribution. She was CIA before CIA existed. If it ain't talking about that, I ain't trying to go see that mess. And neither should you, because it's insulting. I'm not going to go into what I heard it was about and this, that, and the other. If it's not talking about that, or what is it talking about? It ain't talking about nothing. The woman was married to two black men. The woman was not a cheek turner. She did whatever she had to do by any means necessary to liberate herself and her people under duress over and over and over and over again. It is extremely important for people who are classified as black to take control of our own narrative. Take ownership of our own narrative. Protect and preserve it. Because if you let somebody else tell you who you are and where you come from, you're going to be around here confused. Bamboozled. Bewildered. Not knowing what's going on. Especially in real time. You're always going to be reacting on every individual incident. Can't be doing that. I'm going to play a clip before I get out of here of the legacy of Harriet Tubman. Now, this clip is by the History Channel, but there is some constructive information in it. It is not giving the full context, but it is doing what the mainstream media usually do. It goes over the cliff notes. The cliff notes are extremely important. If the cliff notes aren't in the motion picture, don't waste your time in the doggone motion picture. And without further ado, History Channel's video essay on Queen Mother Harriet Tubman. Cue the clear.
Harriet Tubman, former slave and leader in the Underground Railroad, was also a Union spy. And the first woman in U.S. history to lead a military expedition. Here's how. After escaping slavery herself, Harriet Tubman rescued slaves throughout the 1850s. And when the Civil War started, she offered her services to the Union war effort. In 1863, she was assigned to Colonel James Montgomery to work for the Union Army as a nurse, cook, and spy. Tubman disguised herself as an aging woman and moved behind Confederate lines unnoticed, gathering information from a network of informants. Slaves traded information in exchange for a chance at freedom, and sometimes cash. The covert operation was approved by President Abraham Lincoln and run by Secretary of State William Seward. In South Carolina, Tubman worked in Union-controlled contraband camps, where escaped slaves sought safety. There, she recruited local informants and found out where other slaves were being held. Tubman and other spies would gather intel about Confederate plans, such as where they had dropped barrels filled with gunpowder to attack Union boats. On June 1st, 1863, alongside Colonel Montgomery, she led 300 black soldiers to raid rice plantations along the Combahee River in South Carolina, making her the first woman in American history to plan and lead a military operation. The soldiers ransacked the plantations, setting fire to buildings and freeing more than 700 slaves. Tubman continued to work as a nurse, cook, and spy for another year, but she was only paid $200 for her entire war service and was never paid all of the benefits owed to her, despite multiple appeals to the federal government. It wasn't until 1890, 2 years after her husband's death, that she received a small pension for being the widow of a war veteran. And it wasn't until 1899 that her pension was increased, but that didn't make up for the benefits she deserved. It would take another 100 years for Tubman to get the money she was owed, when in 2002 Congress was again alerted about the pension, and soon after provided $11,750 to the Harriet Tubman home in Auburn, New York.
And there you have it. And I hope I have contributed to less confusion. And always remember, keep learning and stay codified.